Greg Biffle is not your prototypical NASCAR driver. In his 30s, born and raised 3,000 miles from the heart of NASCAR country.
We're from the wrong side of the river, being the Mississippi.
This outsider had the deck stacked against him.
I created my opportunity from scratch with nobody's help.
But a keen eye for talent launched Biffle into the high-octane world of racing's elite.
To me, it was the best package that I had seen in a long, long time for a young driver.
He now stands poised to make racing history, with a chance to become NASCAR's first Triple Crown winner. This is the story of unlikely champion Greg Biffle. This is NASCAR, driven to win.
This is where you got to be careful as a rookie. I mean, how good is this kid? Do you have the knowledge? Do you have what it takes to get by him? Do you have the knowledge? He is closing fast now.
Boy, this is a dream come true for him.
White flag, boys, last time. And here they come.
Greg Biffle entered his 2005 campaign as a long shot for the championship battle. After finishing 17th the previous season, few viewed Biffle as a bona fide contender. In a series obsessed with youth, 30-something Greg Biffle had always flown low on the racing radar. But in 2005, Biffle announced his presence with authority. He won in the second race of the season at California Speedway, and his momentum didn't stop there.
And here goes Biffle for the lead.
Greg Biffle has them all in his mirror. Greg Biffle wins in Texas.
Woo, great job, Greg. Glad we had you in our court today.
Here we go, baby. Yeehaw.
Greg Biffle will take his Roush Ford to victory lane.
With 6 wins and a near Nextel Cup Championship, Greg Biffle had officially arrived. Growing up in Vancouver, Washington, Greg Biffle was fueled by any and every gas-burning vehicle.
Being from Vancouver, Washington, I said, unfortunately, the kid's never going to get a shot.
Biffle's dream of becoming a NASCAR champion seemed impossible, as distant as the 3,000 miles that separated his home from the race shops of North Carolina or the sandy beaches of Daytona.
We're from the wrong side of the river, being the Mississippi.
Discovering his driving talent during high school revealed a lifelong problem.
Greg had to wait longer than most people did in order to get their shot.
Biffle's age would work against him in a sport filled with rivals who had been behind the wheel since grade school.
As a real young boy, he was very sleepy. If you couldn't find him, he was up taking a nap. And then as he got a little bit older, then he was always like flying. So he got faster and faster as he grew older. The biggest thrill, I guess, was when he got his first motorcycle and he started riding when he was 5.
You know, I rode a motorcycle since I was old enough to walk.
Motorcycle riding was his passion, and always wanted to go faster, wanted a bigger bike.
Speed was always the goal for Greg. He traded his motorcycle for more horsepower and 2 more wheels.
His first car was a '76 Formula Firebird, yellow. Dad bought it, and Greg was 14 and a half. Got him in some trouble, got him known also.
This car was, at one point in time, posted on our board in the officer's room at the old police department when we could do things like that. And it was just a thing of be aware of this car. It's a problem fast traffic car.
He'd really developed this need for speed at an early age, and when he got in his car, he was just silly in it, you know, and he would drive too fast where he shouldn't, and they started issuing him tickets, and then they remembered his name, and then one thing led to another, and he developed a real relationship with the local police as the guy to give a ticket to, so.
As a young man, Greg had quite a reputation, or developed one as a result of how he liked to drive. The one thing that I remember most about Greg was one day when I was at the high school principal's office, and that office has a view of the street. And I remember seeing Greg's yellow car stop right in front of the office and proceed to burn them off or create a bunch of blue smoke as he spun down the street and away from the school. And I was able to stop Greg later that afternoon, and I recall his look, and his look was identical to that that's characterized in a commercial that he participates in now, where he stopped by the police. And I just thought to myself, that's the familiar look, and that's Greg Biffle.
When he got to be about 16, 17, his dad took him to Portland Speedway one night with a friend, and they went over there and watched them race, and then that was it. That's all he wanted to do was build a car for the track and go over there and run the car at the track.
I think the whole reason why my dad took me to the racetrack on that Friday night was to get me off of the street, you know, because I'm out street racing on Friday and Saturday night. I got a bunch of tickets. When I got into the racing, then I kind of became a hermit crab, because that's all I did was race. So I never, you know, went out. I never, you know, I didn't do all these things because Friday and Saturday night I was at the racetrack.
In Vancouver, Greg teamed up with best friend Roger Oldschi. A friendship forged on building business deals and late model race cars.
I started buying steel from his mom and dad and from him to build a little bit of race car stuff, and then he started building race cars too. And we just kind of hooked up from there, started building cars.
Roger really got me to where I'm at today, because I was just messing around building street stocks and limited sportsman cars and selling parts, and you know, was nervous to step into that, building late model cars, and I couldn't really do it by myself. With an automotive background and then the steel construction background, I built myself a race car. I worked night and day on the thing. I lost like 12 pounds. I was skinny to start with, but I was skin and bones when I got done with the thing. I'd work 16, 17 hours a day.
The fortunate thing was that Greg could build the chassis, and he and Roger built the cars, hung the bodies. They did all that work. So really our big expense was the motors and then the racing money that you needed for your tires and tow and your crew and all that kind of stuff. It did cost a lot of money, and it had a few credit cards on fire for a while.
I was kind of getting worried a little bit at that point. I think because, you know, I couldn't get right in front of the right people.
He went everywhere he thought he needed to be, that he could afford to go, that someone might see him, and then that would end up with the call to do professional racing.
Once I got into that late model stage, my goal was to make it to what then was Winston Cup, but wasn't ever sure if I had the ability or the talent to do it.
Already in his mid-20s, Greg knew that the clock was ticking on his NASCAR dream. But his improbable dream was about to be given new life. Thanks to the desert, a hunch, and a NASCAR champion.
If I had, you know, wanted to have another talent or wish a talent I had is probably play a guitar. I think the first one I went to was Metallica. Well, I guess I did have a nickname in high school because a lot of people call me Biff, you know, for short, and I guess they've kind of picked that up a little. I like the Dallas Cowboys. So every once in a while, people say I look like Nicolas Cage.
In 1995, Greg Biffle went to Tucson, Arizona, hoping to provide one last gasp for his quickly fading dreams. An aging Northwesterner, the odds were against him. But in the high desert, Biffle caught the eye of Benny Parsons, a NASCAR champion turned broadcaster.
In the mid-90s, ESPN decided to do a program for the race fans in the winter called Winter Heat. I was working the show as an analyst, and my job is I walk through the garage area and talk to folks and find out who they are and what's going on. And I ran across this guy from Vancouver, Washington, Greg Biffle.
You know, I was asking Benny, what do I need to do? You know, what do you suggest? And it was always the money struggle. You know, I drove an old beat-up 68 Chevy pickup truck forever, you know, and made good money at my business. You know, I'm eating noodle-roni at home and I'm buying, you know, $1,000 parts for my race car constantly.
When you ask him what he did for a living, he said, I build race cars. I mean, to me, it was the best package that I had seen in a long, long time for a young driver. Someone that could win and knew how to get a race car around the racetrack, knew how a race car worked. So, and being from Vancouver, Washington, I said, unfortunately, the kid's never going to get a shot. And unless it's up to me to get him a shot.
Benny caught the ear of Jack Roush, a NASCAR owner with a history of winning in all forms of motorsport. Looking to fill an open truck series ride, Parsons' advice came at the perfect time.
He came to me one day and he says, look, I just came back from winter heat, and he says, I saw a young driver by the name of Greg Biffle. He says, you could not believe how talented he was, or the way he dominated that field. He said, if you ever need a driver, he said, you need to be thinking about Greg Biffle.
Probably the most humbling thing that ever happened to me, Jack Roush hired Greg Biffle on that statement, sight unseen.
Jack Roush gave his second-in-command permission to make the call.
We were going to hire someone we had never met, never seen racing, and that only one person that we knew had ever seen him race, but that person was a very credible, experienced person.
And I were just getting ready to wash our hands, getting ready to go to lunch, and my parts manager says, came across the PA and said, Greg, you have a call. It's Jeff Smith on line 2.
He thought that I was a buddy of his, just putting him on about coming to race for Roush Racing.
Yeah, we were getting ready to go to lunch, and he said, hang on, you know, these guys are from Roush. He just called me, Jeff Smith, and we're like, you know, we didn't believe it. It took him a while to believe it.
I was shocked, believe me. You know, it was like one guy out of how many across the United States that race late models, street stocks, that have won championships. I've got the call.
They had him come to Detroit to meet with Jack Roush and also the tentative sponsor for the truck and do an interview. And he just couldn't wait. He was just thrilled that actually had happened, and he had a chance at something like that.
They wanted me to send them some pictures, a resume. I didn't have a resume, you know. I mean, I didn't even probably know how to put a resume together. You know, I just knew how to drive a race car.
I'm not sure that in his lifetime or thoughts at that moment that he was ever going to leave Vancouver, Washington, and that his racing was going to be all local for the rest of his life.
And he was not able to get through the door. And so by the time he got through at 28, he was already mature, and he was motivated beyond his imagination, or beyond the imagination of most of us. So he was really so determined to go do it because he'd lost so much time and he just had to get started.
Sometimes when you get to start a little later, you're a little hungrier and you're a little more mature, and you know what it means and what it takes to be successful over the long haul. And so I think Greg got advantage by the fact that he started in professional racing at the truck series level when he was 27 or 28 years old.
In 1998, Greg climbed into the driver's seat of Roush Racing's Craftsman Truck Series team, the first of 2 stepping stones to the Nextel Cup. The 28-year-old rookie had a rocky start. Patience may have guided Biffle past the obstacles of age and distance, but now that patience seemed to have run out, just when he needed it most.
Around goes Anderson. Around goes Biffle. Hard crash into the wall at the first corner, and that's Greg Biffle. Greg Biffle's night finally done. Trouble, a truck in the wall, turn 1. That's Greg Biffle.
I don't know if it was learning the equipment, learning the tracks, or what it was that caused his problems.
Yeah, so we tore up a lot of trucks to start with because he couldn't be that much patient with anybody or with anything. And boy, he was a young man in a hurry if there ever was one.
You know, so they felt that I was maybe over-aggressive, wasn't listening, wasn't paying attention, those kinds of things. So it was a tough year, the first year.
Jack stepped in to lead a very famous meeting. He gave Greg a negative incentive. If he wrecked again, and the crew determined that it was his fault that he wrecked, he was going to be fined $10,000. If he wrecked twice and the crew said it was his fault, he would be fined $20,000. And if he wrecked 3 times, it was going to be $40,000. And he told Greg there wouldn't be a 4th time.
And I think that kind of settled him down a little bit. You know, it took him a while to learn, you know, you can't drive it like the late model cars. You know, it's not a 50-lap race. You know, it's 200 laps. You got to be there at the end.
He settled down a little bit and then continued to demonstrate the great potential that he had. And then in the next 2 years, he was clearly the force to beat in the Craftsman Truck Series.
You've just seen a great run. Greg Biffle, your winner. So Greg Biffle is your winner at the Memphis 200. Greg Biffle steps out of the Grainger.com Ford and celebrates victory number 3 in the Grainger Ford. Is now your points leader in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series.
In just his 3rd Truck Series season, Greg Biffle captured his first NASCAR championship, and the first for car owner Jack Roush. The number 50 Ford F-150 was so dominant, the title was clinched in the season's next to last race. The next stepping stone, the NASCAR Busch Series. The Busch Series has been NASCAR's proving ground for 5 decades, the final slippery step to Nextel Cup.
Second at Rockingham, second at Darlington, second at Charlotte, third at Richmond, and now his first win of the year.
It is red and black in victory lane. Greg Biffle wins at St. Louis.
Greg Biffle brings it off turn 4 to the checkered flag.
It took Biffle 3 seasons to win a Truck Series title, but he won the Busch Championship in just 2 years.
Greg Biffle is the 2000 NASCAR Busch Series champion.
I have to say that I wouldn't change anything. You know, I don't know what I would change because, you know, if I had to stay 3 years in the Truck Series to get my title. I had to stay 2 in the Busch Series to get my title. Those titles are important to me, and I don't think that I want to sacrifice those 2 titles to be here any sooner.
A lifetime of patience had paid off. With 2 championship trophies, no one could question Biffle's resume. But in NASCAR's top series, the Nextel Cup, the past doesn't matter. Winning does. After a lifetime of disproving doubters, Greg Biffle had arrived in NASCAR's premier division, the Nextel Cup Series. Despite the past success, he remained low profile, and at the age of 33, didn't quite fit into racing's youth movement. But as he entered his rookie season of 2003, there were bigger problems to worry about than his age.
He was not a guy that looks for extra attention or looks particularly to make controversy. He's always been extremely exciting to watch on the racetrack. I think part of the reason that he's a little bit less on the radar screen when he came into Cup is that we had a rocky start in the Cup program.
They hadn't used the 16 team for 3 or 4 years, so it was new. There were no cars built. There was no team in place. So when he started his Cup career in 2003, it was terrible. They had like 3 cars ready.
Despite a lackluster rookie year, an unlikely victory came at the hallowed grounds of Daytona.
Greg Biffle is going to score a win at Daytona in just his 23rd NASCAR Winston Cup start.
In 2003, veteran crew chief Doug Richard was brought in to infuse new life into the number 16 team. At the age of 19, Richard led Dale Earnhardt to the 1980 Cup Championship. A quarter century later, he's hungry for title number 2.
Greg was a bullfighter type driver, you know, in there, don't give an inch. And I felt like this past year, there was a lot of give and take, and I think we came out with a lot better results when we had the give and take.
In the 2005 season, Biffle was trying to make history as the first Truck, Busch, and Cup champion. Greg Biffle entered the last race of the season with his eyes on a championship. With everything on the line, he did everything he could. He brought home a win at Homestead, but it wasn't enough to take over the championship from Tony Stewart. Greg was so close to his dream, so close to making history as the first to win all 3 of NASCAR's premier divisions. Biffle dominated the year with 6 wins and finished second in the point standings.
The public's had to wait a couple of years before they realized that Greg is the real deal. He's going to be steady with us. He is steady with us. He's a guy that does all his talking inside the race car.
In the race car, you would think he would be a terror, you know, with such intensity that in the levels he tries to achieve. But he's really pretty calm. He's one of the calmer drivers, you know, in the car that I've ever really worked with.
Seems like a long race to me. I'm ready for it to be over. Of course, I'm leading, so.
After finishing second in the 2005 championship, Greg Biffle is no longer under the radar. Race fans now constantly have their sights set on the number 16 car. Each week they watch and they wonder, can this over-the-hill Washington native become the first driver to win all 3 of NASCAR's top divisions?
He obviously got his shot a lot later than most people did. But I really don't think his age has anything to do with it. He is 36, but he drives his heart out every race. So until he's in a wheelchair and in a walker, I don't think it's gonna make a difference because he's competitive.
He may be a late bloomer, but he will be a champion.
Anybody that's that dedicated to something really deserves any success that he gets.
He's our first NASCAR champion in the Truck Series. He's our first NASCAR champion in the Busch Series. And he's the only guy that we have right now that has a possibility of completing the trifecta. And I think the historical opportunity for Greg Biffle to be the champion in all 3 series for Jack Roush and Roush Racing is something that is important to him to achieve.
I'm in the best position right now that I've ever been in my life to win a title. So I got the motivation, the drive. I'm ready. I'm ready to win a Nextel Cup title.
Greg Biffle, driven to make racing history, driven to prove the non-believers wrong, driven to win.